So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. We're chatting today about how it's a journey to choosing the right Martech to solve your data problems. So we're chatting here today with Chris Marriott, the founder of Email Connect, and Luke Ambrosetti, the Senior Partner Solutions Engineer at Snowflake. So we're going to chat a little bit about how Snowflake customers are evaluating customer engagement platforms and CDPs, and providing audience members with actionable framework to ask questions during their next vendor evaluation. So with that, I'm going to kick it off so that Chris and Luke can give their introductions. And just wanted to quickly point out that we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please toss them in the chat and we will make sure to cover those at the end. So I guess I will kick it over to you first, Chris.
Great, thank you. And it's great to be here, and it's especially great to be here with Luke joining, because he is one of my go-to people in the industry. But you really are. He's one of my go-to people in the industry when I'm even trying to decipher issues around data and cloud data storage and relational database versus NoSQL database. So I'm delighted to have him here. My company, Email Connect, we manage enterprise RFPs for brands. So what I bring to the table is really an understanding of how brands think about, obviously, the RFP process and what they need to ask, and a big part of our job is really helping to educate them on what it is they need to look for based on their particular requirements at that time. So that's why I'm here, and I'll let Luke talk about himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm Luke. Thank you for the great introduction to the both of you, actually, right? Chris, I've always really enjoyed chatting with Chris, whether it's just us or on the Email Geek Slack channel or wherever else, Chris, that we chat. I'm not sure. Probably a couple other places. But I'm Luke. I'm a partner SE here at Snowflake. So I take care of our Martech AdTech ecosystem, right? So I make sure that our Martech AdTech partners have the best integrations with Snowflake, so that again brands can get their work done efficiently.
Well, I was just talking with the microphone muted, so that's fun.
Luke and I were getting nervous. Have we forgotten something?
Yeah. Okay, so now that you can actually hear me, thank you both for the introduction, and thank you both for being here. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of get us started by chatting a little bit about just how Snowflake customers typically would evaluate customer engagement platforms and CDPs when they're looking for a new platform.
Chris, do you want to start with that, or you want me to go first?
Why don't you start with that, since it's Snowflake specific?
Yeah, I would say, and probably this is Snowflake specific, but probably works for any other data platform too.
Yeah.
When it comes to both kind of just, I would say Martech in general, that could be a customer engagement platform, it could be a customer data platform, right? A lot of times that they come from different sides of the business, right? Sometimes they come from more of the marketing team. Sometimes they come from more of the data team who is managing all the data assets or data products for the marketing team. And so the lens of the RFP, at least the few that I've seen, come from one of those two teams, right, or two personas. And so if it's more from the data side, right, they're asking more technical questions. That's where actually I typically get more involved and talking about our different partners and the different ecosystem that we have, because they're very curious about how the partner is using their data in Snowflake, how they get access to that data, right? What's the mechanism for kind of collaborating on that data? So that's where I tend to get more involved, is with the data teams to discuss those more technical integrations. But also we talk to marketing teams too, and to understand, like, hey, yeah, this is how data gets used. Here are the kind of the pros and cons of these types of integrations that are out there. And yeah, here's some considerations if you go with vendor A, B, or C, or other considerations if you go vendor, D, E, or F, right? Or I should say partner, right? Because they are all of our partners here at Snowflake. But that's kind of the things that I actually chat about with brands when I talk to them directly. But otherwise, it's then also telling the partners, hey, this is what brands are looking for at the end of the day. This is what, when we talk to them, this is the kind of integration that they're looking for as well. So that's also very helpful in my role to kind of talk to both sides and make sure that they're both in tune with each other. Chris?
Yeah, and Luke makes a great point in terms of when I step back and when I'm beginning to manage an RFP for a brand, and our clients tend to send in the billions of emails, at least in the hundreds of millions of emails. And what I've seen over the years is there is a distinction between, it depends which group you're talking to. You'll hear very different needs when it comes around data integration, or even how much they care about data integration. And by that I mean IT guys tend to want to play the data where it lies. They want to move data as little as possible from one platform to another for reasons of security, for reasons of workload, for reasons of having to set up the APIs and the SMTPs and blah, 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 blah. So their natural inclination is you hook to our data. Now, in the real world, that's not necessarily possible for most platforms. And from the brand's perspective, they're coming at it more, I don't care where the data is, as long as it's real time and available when I want to use it in an email campaign or something else. And so those are very different approaches, and the infrastructure to support those can look very different or not, depending on how you work with your brands, and or from my perspective, or if you're Luke, how the various solutions you can offer that can come close to sort of partially meeting one group's needs and partially meeting another group's needs. But oftentimes in an RFP, it's whoever has most influence in the process has the most influence in the outcome. And I've seen that as well, where I can almost predict which ESP or which ESPs are going to be most interesting based on whether it's IT who are leading the charge, or whether it's the marketing and the campaign production people, who of course are interested in fast, easy, efficient platforms, data, whatever.
Okay, that's great. So it feels like, when you're looking for considering a new vendor, they all kind of sound the same. That's something that we've run into quite a bit when talking, with different people. And I'm curious, when you're doing a vendor evaluation, what kind of red flags should you be looking out for? What kind of, they all do sound the same. So what should you be looking out for? And I'm not sure who wants to take that one first.
Luke went first last time. I'll go first. First of all, and this is where somebody like Luke can be of immense value, is just starting with the understanding that there are two basic types of database structure in the ESP world these days. There's relational databases that have been used by vendors since the first decade of the century as they replaced flat files. Relational databases became the de facto standard for ESP vendor platforms. But in the past 10 years, we've seen the rise of the NoSQL databases, which Luke schooled me. I formerly called them schemaless, but he schooled me that NoSQL, it makes you sound more intelligent among tech people. So you have the NoSQL databases, and understanding. Oftentimes an RFP will be conducted by a brand, and they'll have both types of vendors in there, and that could be okay, but it might not be okay. And understanding what you want to do is you want to dig in. You want to understand, well, what platform, what database is this vendor built on, and what database is this vendor? And if you've got a NoSchema or NoSQL, and if you're looking at NoSQL and relational databases, understanding the differences between them and what those implications are for your program, to me is a massive red flag that you need to be aware of. And the vendors aren't always going to say, well, you know what, we're relational, they're NoSQL, and you need to ask those hard questions. You need to say, why would I be better served as a brand on a NoSQL database as opposed to a relational database, and vice versa? I think those are extremely important things that brands need to know in going, and I think it's extremely important to ask those questions. And they're not always things that you put into a requirements document, because I look through our requirements documents, and it's often around data transfer and APIs and those types of things. These are more fundamental questions that again aren't a simple requirement, but are rather, you built a platform on a NoSQL database. There must be a reason why, and what do you think it offers your clients?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. I'll take first thing, you take a half step back and say, kind of what you were saying, Chris, you have to dig a level deeper than just the checkbox in the RFP, right? The easiest way for me to explain it, because I work at Snowflake, is a lot of times is, do you have an integration to Snowflake? That's the checkbox on the RFP. That's the line item, is there an integration?
Yep, we have that in requirement.
When I really, it's like, if I'm telling brands, look, if you care about the integration to Snowflake, you need to ask 7 questions, not 1, right? You need to go just 1 level deeper and understand more about how it works, not just about, whether it's there or not to begin with. That kind of thing goes to, okay, what you're talking about with different types of databases that partners or that vendors use out there, right? Snowflake is this kind of analytical database, right? It's great for more analytical processing. It's not great for a web app, right? To sit as a for like an e-com site, right? That's not what we're built for. We're built for reporting and analytics as our foundation. You can build apps on top of us, but that's a different conversation altogether, right?
That's another webinar.
Yeah, exactly, another webinar. But to Chris's point, a lot of different companies use different types of databases to get things done and they abstract them, right, for their platform. So when you think about journey orchestration, right, what's kind of happening under the hood, journey state, right, the data used for the journey, that's all happening kind of within a database. And so, how that schema, right, and how that data is structured is very, very important for your business, right? Some businesses have important requirements when it comes to their data, right? Now, I'm not just talking about data security. I'm not talking about, compliance. I'm talking about, how do we think about our customer, right? If I'm a bank, as an example, I have accounts and I have customers. I have a whole bunch of customers, maybe 3 customers in one account, and maybe one customer has many accounts. So that means there's a many-to-many relationship between accounts and customers. So when I want to go and build journeys, or I want to go and create segments of my data to send emails to, do I have to think about it from a customer structure, an account structure? Can I think about it in both, right? So those are the kind of questions to ask. Like, hey, if your data is important to you in the way that your business works, you have to understand that level deeper, right? That Chris is talking about of, how's the data being structured? Can I access the data in the way that I wanted to? And can I kind of build my segmentation the way that I wanted to send the campaigns that I want to send?
Yeah, and in that scenario you were talking about, Luke, right there, that bank, to put sort of a context around relational versus NoSQL. Given that scenario, what would which direction would a bank be better going? And we're not saying this vendor is better or that vendor, but would you say that that's better solved by a NoSQL database or by a relational database?
I'll give you the classical answer, Chris, and that is, it depends.
Here we go.
Right?
It depends.
At the end of the day, yeah, it's probably the abstraction layer matters more over the actual database itself than the actual database. What I'll say though is the main reason that a lot of vendors out there have adopted NoSQL databases is because it's given them more flexibility on schemas, right? When you think about a relational database and a very structured table structure, think Excel, right? Think rows and columns, right? Where with a NoSQL database, it's more document oriented, right? It's semi-structured JSON, if you know what those things are, right? So you have a bit more flexibility in the actual structure. So that's why many vendors have built on NoSQL, but it's not the database layer isn't as important as the abstraction over it. So NoSQL has given them some of that more flexibility, but at the end of the day, it's going to depend, right?
Mhm. Well, and what's interesting, we talked and want to thank again Message Gears for hosting this is again not taking a position, but Message Gears we were talking about the other day in this case is neither fish nor fowl. It truly is a unicorn in that you want a relational database, you got it. You want a NoSQL database, you got it. So really at this point in time, they're the only one that can really adapt to either, and which is an interesting and yet throws another wrench into the whole decision-making process. But
Yeah.
it is another thing to be considered, I think. And the other thing, and we're talking about data, and Elspeth, you said earlier that everybody sounds alike, and I mean that's what good RFPs are for, because you're right. Every vendor sounds alike when they're giving their pitch. I mean, when they're giving their demos, left to their own devices, they're going to show you what they do best. Which, if I were them, that's exactly what I would do. But because every vendor does different things good, what you really need to, and this gets back to Luke and what Luke was saying, I mean, you need to really understand how you can best store, move, and use your data. And that requires the hard work of deep dives, hard work of use cases, and having those conversations. You don't have to have those conversations with 8 or 10 vendors. Our process, we start with 8 or 10 with our clients, and we use requirements documents and scoring to get down to the final 4. But when we get down to that final 4, there is some massive deep diving, and Message Gears has been through that with us, and where these things really show us how becomes an extremely important part of the process. In particular, because one of the things that have emerged, from brands in recent years, and I fully understand it and support it, is, the marketing team, the campaign production team, they don't want to have to haul in their IT department or vendor staff to do things like setting up a new table, setting up an API call, they're adding a new attribute. They want to be able to do these things themselves. So simplicity is a huge part of the game these days, beyond just, can you do it? Sure, we can do it. And that's the thing when they all sound alike. Can you do it? Sure. Is every function in the UI available via API? Yeah. But it goes back to even something Luke was saying earlier. That that's just the surface answer. What you really need is, okay, now how hard is it to do these things, and can I do it themselves? Because here the red flag is the simple yes. That's going to get the vendor to be able to move on to the next point, when you really need more. The yes isn't enough of an answer. Yes, we can do it, but because the variations between how that's done can go from the sublimely elegant and simple to something incredibly complicated and dragging in your IT team, and they're never happy to get dragged in.
Yeah. So to answer the question, that's my red flag too, is when there's no how, right? Yeah. There's no how. You got to dig in on how, and I truly understand what's happening, because to Chris's point, a yes from one vendor and a yes from another vendor could be very, very different yes. I mean, the first way you might have to do your team might have to do a lot more work, right, than maybe the other vendor, and it could be more work in different areas, and that's okay. But it's understanding, where the work, where your team is more comfortable with doing that work. And so, yeah, digging in is the key.
So I feel like you all have, somewhat answered this, but I'd love to hear, is there a question that, like, if you could narrow it down to one question that you just really wish that people would ask more when they're looking into new tech that people forget to ask about or overlook, what would that be?
In my world, real time is thrown around by vendors all the time. So my follow-up to that would be define real time, because that can be, it's whatever they decide, whatever that vendor has decided real time represents. That's real time to them, but it might not be real time to you. So yes, I would always say define real time. Whenever you hear a vendor say, and it happens in real time, you got to say define that in real time. define real time. What does that mean?
And yeah, I'll even add to that, fortunately, unfortunately, because I think this kind of gets to this level of complexity, which I almost hate. You have to almost define real time by use case, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right? Because real time, let's take a couple use cases here, right? Real time in website personalization, right? That typically has to be probably sub 100, 200 milliseconds, right? Because those page loads have to be fast, they have to be very, very fast, right? But when it comes to real time message, right? 2 or 3 seconds is probably okay, right? When it comes to waiting for a message to like a forgot password, right? Waiting 3 seconds, I think is okay, and that's real time enough. And then when it comes to resolving a profile or identity, right? Probably 10 minutes is okay, right? So, and that's quote unquote real time. So you have to sometimes look at it by use case, which is unfortunate because that's also a lot of hard work too, to look at them by use case, but that can also have a big impact because again, just intraday is or every 12 hours is not real time, unfortunately, right? Like
No.
that's it's more real time or it's near real time to a certain degree, but yeah, definitely have definitions around what real time means is important.
Yeah, that's a great example, and you think about sort of transactional and what real time means to that, because if you're, I mean, you certainly don't want to send an email to somebody encouraging a transaction that they've made recently. So in real time, it's how quickly is that transaction in the database associated with that person and available to block a potential email going out that morning. Because to your point, I mean, 12 hours might be fine, but not if there's an email campaign that's about to go out and encourage person to buy what they just bought. So it really gets down to the use case and what your needs are, and how quickly these things can actually be available and useful to you. And I want to say, I don't want to come across, vendors don't mislead. When you're dealing with enterprise vendors and they're not deliberately misleading. They often, and I see this in their responses to their responses to requirements documents, where they know something so well and they just say it or write it in a way that to them it's perfectly clear, because again, they know what they mean, but it doesn't necessarily come across. I've talked to vendors on many occasions and said, when I'm going through, where they did not do well, I say, I know what you meant here, but that's because I've been doing this a while. The brand didn't get it. So for vendors, my advice is, make sure that you're answering questions and doing demos. Keep in mind that they know nothing. They don't know what you know. So you can't skip over things that in your mind aren't important because you've known about it forever, but could be extremely important to your audience.
I'm gonna pause you there because unfortunately we only have about 5 more minutes and we had a couple of questions that have come in. So I just wanna ask those really quickly to make sure we get through those. And again, if anybody else has a question, please plug that in. There's a questions section and a chat. And even if we don't get to them today, we can make sure to answer them in the follow-up email as well. So, okay, so you all can decide who takes this one, or if you both take turns. So who should actually own the RFP process when an organization is purchasing Martech software? Is it better for marketing to own it, or IT, or something else?
Luke and I are probably going to give 2 different answers. I think marketing should probably take the lead, but I think IT should have a major voice in the process.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think I'd love for it to be joint, right? But we all know that's not really feasible for it to be a joint. Yeah, exactly. So I would say I agree with Chris that it probably should be marketing owned, and then IT needs to have a voice and seat at the table for sure.
And at the end of the day, you don't forget the campaign production team that often is forgotten, but they're the ones that are going to use it. And if you just stick them with something that they've had no voice in, passive aggressive behavior can torpedo any new Martech installation. So, everybody, and that's why, and I know you want me to get the next question, I'll just say, that's where scorecards are so valuable, where everybody scores, everybody has a voice, and nobody feels like that you can't ignore a filled in scorecard. You got to include it in the roll-up.
Okay, that actually might answer the next question in a sense. So the next question is, I'm not the decision maker, but I'm the one who has to use the tech stack. How can I make sure my opinions are heard during the process?
Yeah, that goes back to scorecards, but you've got to either bring in an outside, have your company bring in an outside partner like an Email Connect, because everything we do is scorecard driven, and that's the best way to ensure that you and your team and your scorecards are taken with the same validity as others, and it really, and scorecards are good for that, but they're also good for when at the end of the process the CEO or CFO says, why did you make this decision? Scorecards. Nothing beats paperwork and scorecards to say, hey, look at all the people who contributed this decision. While not unanimous, it was the vast majority of people voted throughout the process for the vendor we selected.
I would say if you have a desire to make sure your voice is heard, absolutely, participate in the scorecards. But if there's something that you have, this desire comes from like a concern that you have, make sure you do raise that concern with the owner and provide some reasoning for it, right? Like write up a document on, hey, these are the concerns I have about X, Y, or Z, right? And give suggestions on those concerns of how they can be resolved with that vendor or with another vendor, right? And should be open and honest. But typically I don't know about you, Chris, I haven't seen many where like they're not taking in feedback from the team at large, right?
I saw an instance, and I think your advice there was great. I saw an instance where there was a centralized campaign production team and multiple brands that all leveraged them. And it became apparent through the process that the brand teams didn't care at all that the campaign production team didn't like the platform they were using and desperately wanted to switch. And I think in going, if the campaign team had framed it, and it was a lesson I learned, and you just said, if the campaign team had said to the brands, here's how it's impacting you, not just we hate it, but here's what that means for you and your business, I think they could have gotten the brand teams behind them. And because at the end of the day, brand teams were like, you know what, not worth the risk. We don't want to switch. You don't like the platform, tough. It doesn't seem to be affecting us, so tough.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our 30 minutes. That came quickly. So just want to thank you both for joining, and thank everyone in the audience who was able to come out as well. And we'll be following up with a recording after this, so you'll see that in your email. So, all right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Elsa.
Everyone.
Luke, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for coming, folks.